There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how much a person slept. It arrives before the day has asked anything of them, before the first obligation has been met or the first difficulty has been encountered. It arrives in the first moments of consciousness, in the space between sleep and wakefulness, when the eyes open in the mind, before it has had time to orient itself to the actual shape of the day ahead, has already begun to produce something, a feeling, a weight, a low and familiar pressure that settles into the morning before the morning has done anything to deserve it. And most people, because this happens so consistently and so automatically, have stopped noticing that it is happening at all. They experience it simply as the way mornings feel, as the natural texture of waking up, not as something that is being done to the day before the day has begun. Here is what makes this worth examining carefully. Two people can wake to identical circumstances, the same kind of work waiting for them, the same relationships, the same unresolved problems, the same ordinary pressures of a life being lived with real stakes. And one of them will move into the day with something that resembles groundedness, a capacity to meet what arrives without being destabilized by it before it even arrives, while the other will spend the day managing a low-grade weight that arrived with them the moment they open their eyes. The circumstances did not produce this difference. The circumstances were identical. What differed happened in a window of time so brief that most people never think to examine it. The first moments of the day, the first movement of the mind toward the hours ahead. That gap, small as it appears, is where something significant is either set in motion or quietly dismantled before it had a chance to begin. There is something worth asking honestly here, because many people will recognize what is being described not as an abstract pattern but as a personal one. The eyes open, and before a single thing has happened, a thought arrives. Today is going to be difficult. I am already behind. I do not have what this day is going to require of me. These thoughts do not feel like thoughts. They feel like assessments, like accurate readings of the situation, like the mind simply reporting what is true. And so they are rarely questioned. They are simply absorbed, carried into the first hour, and allowed to begin the quiet work of shaping what the day will feel like from the inside. By the time the first obligation arrives, the first meeting or the first difficult conversation or the first moment where the day asks something real, the filter through which it will be experienced has already been set, not by the day, but by what the mind did in the moments before the day began, and what happened in those moments, and whether it can be changed, is what everything that follows is about. Most people do not begin their days from a neutral place. This is not a character observation. It is a description of something that happens beneath the level of conscious choice, before intention has had a chance to operate, before the person has decided anything about how they want to meet the hours ahead. The mind that wakes in the morning is not a blank surface waiting to be written on by the day. It arrives already carrying something, the unresolved worry from the night before that did not dissolve during sleep, the low hum of an obligation that was not completed, the residue of a conversation that ended without resolution, the anticipation of something difficult that is coming and cannot yet be addressed. None of this was chosen. None of it was invited consciously into the first moments of the day. It simply arrived because it was never properly set down the night before. And what is not set down gets carried, quietly, automatically, into the morning that follows. Underneath this pattern, there is something worth understanding about the mind itself. Not as a flaw specific to particular people, but as a feature of human psychology that operates in virtually everyone and becomes visible only when its effects are examined honestly. The brain is not primarily an organ of appreciation or neutral observation. It is an organ of threat detection, shaped across a history long enough that the relative safety of modern life has not had time to revise its fundamental priorities. And one of those priorities, operating most clearly in the transition from sleep to wakefulness, is a rapid scan of the environment and the situation for anything that might require defensive preparation. This scan does not wait for actual threats to present themselves. It anticipates. It searches the day ahead for what might go wrong, for what is unresolved, for what is uncertain, for what might demand more than is currently available. And it does this not out of pessimism, but out of a kind of misapplied diligence, a system designed for genuine survival, running its protocols on the ordinary uncertainties of a contemporary life, and finding, in the absence of actual predators, the meeting that might go badly, the relationship that carries unresolved tension, the task that was not finished, and treating each of them with an urgency the situation does not actually require. This is where the daily pattern becomes visible in its most recognizable form. The morning begins in almost immediately, before the first cup of anything has been drunk or the first genuine thought of the day has formed. A hand reaches for a phone. This reach is so habitual that it barely registers as a choice. It feels like simply what one does in the first moments of the day. But what follows it is not neutral. The email that arrived overnight brings with it the implicit demand of someone else's agenda, pressing into the morning before the morning has established any agenda of its own. The social feed offers a curated sequence of other people's apparent progress, other people's visible achievements, other people's presented versions of lives that appear, from the outside and in the particular vulnerability of early morning, to be moving with a confidence and a momentum that contrasts sharply with the low unresolved weight the mind woke up carrying. And the comparison that results is not a fair one. It is not a comparison between two real things. It is a comparison between the interior of one life, with all its genuine complexity and unresolved difficulty, and the exterior presentation of another, carefully selected and deliberately offered. But the mind in the early morning does not make this distinction. It simply registers the gap and adds it to what it was already carrying. And by the time the day has actually begun, by the time the first real demand has been made, the person meeting it is already operating from a place of deficit, already managing anxiety that the day itself did not produce, already behind in a race that started before they were given a chance to decide whether to enter it. What makes this pattern so difficult to interrupt is precisely that it does not feel like a pattern. It feels like reality. The weight that arrives with the morning feels like an accurate assessment of the morning. The anxiety that builds in the first 30 minutes of the day feels like a reasonable response to what the day actually contains. And the comparison that the phone delivers feels like useful information about where one stands. None of it feels automatic. None of it feels like something that is being done to the day rather than something the day is doing. And that invisibility, the way the pattern presents itself as simply the truth of things rather than as a set of habits operating beneath conscious awareness, is what allows it to continue indefinitely, repeating itself each morning, shaping each day from the inside out. without ever being examined closely enough to be seen for what it actually is. Marcus Aurelius did something in the mornings that is easy to misread if it is encountered without the context that makes it genuinely useful. He prepared, not in the logistical sense of reviewing what the day required, but in a deeper and more deliberate sense. He would remind himself before the day began of what the day was likely to contain, not the specific events, but the human texture of it, the difficulty, the frustration, the moments where other people would behave in ways that were thoughtless or ungrateful or contrary to what reason would suggest. He did this not because he was pessimistic about human nature, and not because he wanted to begin each day in a state of braced resignation. He did it because he understood something about the relationship between a prepared mind and an unprepared one that his own experience as someone navigating genuine complexity had made undeniable. The mind that encounters difficulty, having already acknowledged that difficulty was possible, meets it entirely differently than the mind that encounters difficulty while still operating on the assumption that the day should have been easier. One is surprised and therefore destabilized. The other is not surprised, and therefore has access to something the surprised mind does not: the capacity to respond rather than simply react. This was not a technique for lowering expectations. It was a practice for protecting the quality of response in the moments when the day asked the most. Epictetus identified something about the morning that cuts closer to the root of what is actually happening when the first thought of the day shapes everything that follows. He wrote with precision about the relationship between events and the judgments placed upon them, making a distinction that is philosophically clean and psychologically demanding in equal measure. The event itself, whatever it is, carries no inherent emotional charge. It simply occurs. What disturbs, what creates the particular quality of suffering or anxiety or low-grade dread that colors a day from its first moments, is not the event but the judgment the mind places on it, the story constructed around it, the meaning assigned to it before the evidence has been fully gathered. Applied to the morning, this means something precise. The day ahead is not inherently threatening. The meeting is not inherently stressful. The unresolved obligation is not inherently evidence of inadequacy. These are neutral facts until the mind performs its habitual operation on them, layering onto each one an interpretation that the fact itself does not require. The first judgment of the morning, the one that arrives before the day has produced anything to judge, is the clearest example of this mechanism operating without examination. And it is the place where Epictetus would locate both the problem and the only available solution, not in changing what the day contains, but in noticing, with enough clarity and enough honesty, what the mind is doing to what the day contains before it has even begun. Seneca returned repeatedly in his writing to a recognition about time that sounds almost too simple to carry the weight he placed on it. And yet the weight it carries becomes more apparent the more honestly it is examined. He understood that the hours of the day are genuinely ours only in the present, that the past is finished and belongs to a category of things no effort can alter, and that the future is uncertain in ways that make treating it as though it were already determined a form of self-imposed suffering. What this means for the morning is something precise and immediately practical. The weight carried into the first hour from the night before belongs to the past. It describes something that has already occurred and cannot be changed by anything the morning does. The anxiety projected forward into the day ahead belongs to a future that has not yet arrived and may not arrive in the form the anxious mind is already preparing for. Both of these leave the present moment. the only moment where the day can actually be met and lived, occupied by things that are not actually there, by the residue of what is already finished and the anticipation of what has not yet begun. Seneca's understanding was not that the morning should be met with forced positivity or deliberate blindness to what the day genuinely contains. It was that the orientation brought to the morning, the disposition with which the first hour is entered, is the one thing that belongs fully and completely to the person living it. The day will produce what it produces. Other people will behave as they behave. Circumstances will arrange themselves according to forces that operate outside any individual's preference or control. But the mind that enters the day having chosen its orientation, having decided what quality of attention and what foundational response it will bring to whatever arrives, is not at the mercy of what arrives in the way that the unprepared mind is. It meets the day from somewhere, rather than being met by the day from nowhere. And that difference, practiced across enough mornings, becomes the difference between a life that is lived and a life that is merely reacted to. The practice begins with something so small that it is easy to dismiss before it has been genuinely attempted. It begins with a pause, not a long pause, not a meditation requiring special conditions or extended time, but a pause that lasts long enough for one honest question to be asked before the automatic sequence of the morning takes over completely. Because the automatic sequence has momentum. It has been running long enough that it feels like simply what mornings are. And momentum of that kind does not yield to vague intention. It yields only to something specific enough to interrupt it. Something that arrives at the precise moment the interruption is possible, which is the moment of waking, before the hand reaches for the phone, before the first obligation is remembered, before the mind has fully committed to the direction it was already moving. That window is narrow, and most people pass through it without realizing it existed. But it exists every morning. And what happens inside it, or what is allowed to happen inside it without examination, is consequential in ways that the rest of the day rarely gets a chance to correct. The first layer of the practice is simply noticing what the mind produces in that window, not evaluating it immediately, not trying to replace it or argue with it, but noticing it with enough clarity that it becomes visible as something the mind is doing rather than something the day is reporting. This distinction, which appeared earlier in the psychological understanding of how the first thought functions as a filter rather than a fact, becomes a lived experience rather than an abstract idea only when the noticing is practiced with enough consistency that the mind begins to catch itself in the act. A thought arrives. Today is going to be hard. And instead of absorbing it and moving forward inside it, a question is asked. Is this a fact about today? Or is this a habit the mind is running because it ran it yesterday and the day before and the day before that? That question does not require an elaborate answer. It requires only enough honesty to acknowledge that the thought arrived before any evidence was available to support it, and that a thought which arrives before its evidence is not a report. It is a reflex, and reflexes, unlike facts, can be interrupted. What makes this noticing genuinely difficult is not the practice itself. The pause is brief. The question is simple. What makes it difficult is that the automatic thought feels true in a way that is disproportionate to its actual basis. The mind does not experience its own reflexes as reflexes. It experiences them as perceptions, as the natural result of simply opening one's eyes and taking stock of what is there. And so the first time a person attempts to question the first thought of the morning, the mind often pushes back, not with arguments exactly, but with a kind of insistence, a felt sense that the questioning is naive, that the weight the morning carries is simply an accurate reading of what the day genuinely contains, and that pretending otherwise would be a form of dishonesty. This pushback is itself information, because it reveals how thoroughly the automatic pattern has been mistaken for reality. A reflex that cannot be questioned without generating resistance is a reflex that has been running without examination for a very long time. And the resistance it generates when examined is not evidence that the examination is wrong. It is evidence that the examination is necessary. The second layer of the practice moves from noticing the thought to asking what kind of thought it actually is. Because not everything the mind produces in the first moments of the morning deserves the same response. There is a genuine concern, something that points toward a real situation requiring real attention, and there is an automatic pattern, something the mind produces out of habit rather than in response to actual evidence. These feel identical from inside the experience of waking, but they are not identical, and learning to distinguish between them is the practical work that turns awareness into something useful. A genuine concern has a specific object. It points towards something particular, something that can be named and examined and responded to with some kind of concrete action or conscious acceptance. An automatic pattern has a diffuse quality. It fills the morning with a general weight that does not resolve into anything specific enough to address. It simply colors everything, lowering the tone of the day before the day has established its own tone. The person who can begin to feel the difference between these two kinds of morning thought is not yet free of the automatic pattern, but they have acquired something that makes freedom possible: the ability to see the pattern operating, which is always the first condition for being able to choose something different. Once the first thought of the warning has been noticed and the question of whether it is a fact or a reflex has been honestly asked, a second layer of the practice becomes available, and it concerns something that most people have never considered as a deliberate choice: what the mind is given access to in the minutes immediately following wakefulness. This might seem like a minor concern beside the larger questions of how a person relates to their own thoughts and emotions. But the minor appearance is deceptive, because the early morning mind is not in the same state as the mind that has been awake and moving through the world for several hours. It is more open, more impressionable, more vulnerable to whatever enters it in a way that is not weakness but simply the natural condition of a system transitioning from one state to another. What enters that system in the first minutes of the day does not pass through the same filters that would process it later. It lands more directly, settles more deeply, and shapes the interpretive framework for the hours that follow with a thoroughness that later inputs rarely match. This is not a reason for alarm. It is simply a reason for the kind of deliberate attention that the automatic morning sequence never invites. The phone is the clearest example of what is at stake here, and it deserves examination that goes beyond the familiar observation that screens are problematic, because the issue is not the technology itself. It is what the technology delivers into the particular vulnerability of the early morning mind. When the phone is reached for in the first moments of waking, what arrives is not neutral information. What arrives is other people's agendas, other people's crises, other people's carefully curated presentations of their lives, and the implicit demand that all of these things be processed and responded to before the person receiving them has established any internal orientation of their own. The morning that begins this way does not begin from the inside out. It begins from the outside in, with the self as a receiver of whatever the external world happened to produce overnight, rather than as the source of a chosen direction for the day. And a day that begins from the outside in is a day that will likely continue that way, reactive rather than intentional, managed rather than lived, spent responding to what arrives rather than moving toward what was chosen. The boundary being described here is not a rigid prohibition. It is a recognition about sequence, about what deserves to come first in the morning and what can wait until the mind has established enough internal grounding to receive external input without being shaped by it before it has had a chance to shape itself. The emails will still be there. The feed will still be there. The demands and the news and the comparisons that the phone delivers will all remain available. What changes when this boundary is practiced is not access to those things but the condition of the mind that eventually encounters them. A mind that has spent even a few minutes establishing its own orientation before receiving external input is not the same mind as the one that reached for the phone before full consciousness had arrived. It is more settled, more able to receive what comes without being reorganized by it, more capable of engaging with other people's agendas without losing the thread of its own. The boundary is not about avoidance. It is about sequence, about ensuring that the first author of the morning is the person living it rather than whoever happened to send something overnight. But the deeper boundary, the one that operates beneath the practical question of when the phone is reached for, concerns the relationship between the emotion that the morning carries and the decision about what to do with it. Because the morning often carries something real, a genuine concern, a real uncertainty, an authentic feeling about something that matters. And the boundary being practiced here is not a wall built against that feeling. It is a container for it, a way of holding what is real without being governed by it before the day has had a chance to offer any evidence about whether the feeling is proportionate to what the day actually contains. The emotion is felt, because refusing to feel it does not make it less present. It makes it less visible. And what is less visible cannot be examined and cannot be understood and cannot be governed with any intelligence. But the emotion is felt in a context of chosen attention rather than automatic reaction. It is met by a mind that has paused long enough to ask what it is and what it is pointing toward, rather than a mind that absorbed it without noticing and carried it forward into the day as though it were simply the truth of things. That quality of meeting, that small and deliberate act of turning toward the morning's feeling with curiosity rather than simply inheriting it, is the emotional discipline the Stoics pointed toward. Not the elimination of feeling, but the refusal to be unconsciously governed by it. There is a question that most people ask at the beginning of a day without realizing they are asking it. It is not spoken aloud. It does not arrive as a deliberate inquiry. It operates beneath conscious awareness as a kind of default orientation. And it sounds something like this: what is today going to do to me? The question assumes a particular relationship between the person and the day, one in which the day is the active force and the person is the surface on which the day's events will leave their marks. It is the question of someone who has already positioned themselves as a receiver, as someone whose experience of the next several hours will be determined primarily by what those hours happen to contain. And it feels like common sense because it reflects how the day genuinely operates when no alternative orientation has been established. When the morning begins without intention, the day does do things to the person moving through it, not because that is the only available relationship, but because it is the default one. and defaults operate until something more deliberate replaces them. The practical script being described here is the replacement. It is a single question, asked with enough genuine attention that it functions as a reorientation rather than a ritual. Whatever today brings, how do I intend to meet it? The shift from the default question to this one is not cosmetic. It does not simply rephrase the same underlying orientation in more positive language. It changes the fundamental relationship between the person and the day by relocating agency. The default question places agency in the day, in the events and the people and the circumstances that will arrive without being chosen. This question places agency in the response, in the quality of attention brought to whatever arrives, in the values that will govern how difficulty is met, in the character that will show up regardless of what the day produces. And that relocation, from event to response, from what happens to how it is met, is not a minor adjustment in perspective. It is the central movement of Stoic practice applied to the most available moment of every day. What makes this question function as genuine reorientation rather than wishful thinking depends entirely on how it is asked. Because it can be asked as a performance, as a morning affirmation that sounds meaningful and produces nothing because it was never connected to anything specific enough to actually change how the first difficult moment of the day is met. Or it can be asked as a real inquiry, directed at the actual shape of the day ahead, at the specific challenges that are genuinely anticipated, at the particular moments where the automatic pattern is most likely to reassert itself. The meeting where the dynamic tends toward friction, the conversation that carries unresolved weight, the hour in the afternoon when energy drops and the interpretive lens tends to darken. These are the specific locations where the question needs to have already been asked and answered before they arrive. Because in the moment of the difficult thing, the automatic pattern has significant momentum, and a vague intention formed in the morning is rarely sufficient to interrupt it. A specific intention, one that named the anticipated difficulty and decided in advance what quality of response it would receive, has a different kind of presence in the moment it is needed. This is where the practice connects to something Marcus Aurelius understood from his own experience of preparing the mind before the day made its demands. The preparation was not a guarantee. It did not ensure that the day would unfold according to any particular plan or that the responses given in difficult moments would always reflect the intention formed in the quiet of the morning. What it did was change the starting position. It meant that when the difficult moment arrived, there was something already in place to meet it, a question that had been asked, a response that had been at least partially chosen, a small piece of intentional ground to return to when the automatic pattern tried to reassert itself. And returning to that ground, even imperfectly, even after the automatic pattern had already partially taken hold, was always available, because the question had been asked in the morning and the asking left something behind, something that could be found again in the middle of the day when it was needed most. The practice is not about controlling the day. It is about ensuring that the person moving through the day has something of their own to bring to it. Something chosen rather than inherited. Something that belongs to them rather than to whatever the morning happened to produce before intention had a chance to arrive. Something changes when the question, "What is today going to do to me?" stops being the first orientation of the morning. The change does not arrive with the clarity of a decision that has been made and implemented. It arrives the way most genuine changes in a person's relationship with themselves arrive. Gradually, In the accumulation of mornings where the pause was taken and the question was asked and the intention was set. Even imperfectly. Even on the mornings when the automatic pattern had already begun before the practice was remembered. And then the practice was returned to anyway. Without self-criticism. Without the additional weight of having failed to be consistent. Simply returned to. Because it was available to be returned to. And that returning, quiet and unglamorous as it is the actual substance of what is being built. There was a version of this person who woke each morning already in motion, not in the sense of moving toward something chosen, but in the sense of being moved, carried forward by the momentum of whatever the night had left behind and whatever the first minutes of the day happened to deliver. The phone reached for before full consciousness arrived. The comparison absorbed before any internal orientation had been established. The low weight of yesterday's unresolved business pressing into the morning before the morning had done anything to deserve it. That version of the person was not careless. They were simply operating without the awareness that an alternative was available. That the first minutes of the day were not simply what mornings feel like, but were a window. Brief and consistent and available every single morning, in which something could be chosen rather than simply inherited. The discovery of that window does not make the person who finds it exceptional. It makes them attentive. And attentiveness, practiced consistently enough, produces something that looks like equanimity from the outside and feels like groundedness from the inside. The person who emerges from this practice does not become someone to whom mornings are easy. The difficulty that a day genuinely contains does not disappear because the morning was entered with intention. The meeting that carries real tension is still tense. The obligation that requires more than feels comfortable to give is still demanding. The moment in the afternoon when energy drops and the interpretive lens darkens is still there, waiting in the middle of the day with the same reliability it always had. None of that changes. What changes is the position from which all of it is met. A person who has spent even a few minutes establishing their own internal orientation before the day begins its demands is not encountering those demands from the same place as the person who was already in reactive mode before the first demand arrived. They are meeting the day from somewhere, from a small but real piece of ground that was chosen rather than assigned. And that difference in starting position, which seems minor when described and proves to be significant when lived, compounds across days and weeks and months into something that begins to feel like a different relationship with time itself. What this practice builds at the level of identity is worth naming carefully, because it is not what it might appear to be from the outside. It is not the construction of a person who is unaffected by what happens to them, who moves through difficulty without being touched by it, who has achieved some elevated state in which the ordinary friction of a life lived in relationship with the world no longer registers. What it builds is something quieter and more durable than that. It builds a person who knows where they stand before the day tells them where to stand, who has a relationship with their own values and their own chosen responses that is strong enough to remain present even when the day is pressing hard in a different direction, who can feel the pull of the automatic pattern, the reflex toward reaction, the familiar weight of the first thought that arrived before the evidence, and meet all of it from a place that was established before it arrived. That is not the absence of being affected. It is the presence of something that the day did not put there and therefore cannot take away. And that something, built in the quiet of repeated mornings by the simple and unglamorous practice of pausing before the automatic sequence took over, is what inner freedom actually feels like when it is lived rather than described. Not a dramatic liberation, but a quiet and growing capacity to meet each day as a person who chose to be there, rather than someone who simply found themselves in it. There is something worth sitting with before tomorrow morning arrives, not as a task to be completed before sleep, but as a genuine question directed at the actual pattern of how the mornings have been running. What has the first thought of the morning been doing? Not what has it been saying, but what has it been doing? Because the first thought of the morning is not merely a thought. It is an architect, working quickly and largely without supervision, drawing the blueprint for how the day will be experienced from the inside. And it has been doing this work every morning, whether or not it was ever given permission, whether or not its designs were ever examined, whether or not the person waking inside them ever realized that a different design was available. The question is not whether this has been happening. It has been happening. The question is whether it will continue to happen without examination, or whether the examination that changes it will begin tomorrow. The Stoic understanding that runs beneath everything explored here is not asking for a morning routine in the conventional sense. It is not prescribing a sequence of habits to be performed before the day begins. It is pointing toward something more fundamental than habit, toward the recognition that the orientation brought to the first moment of the day is the orientation that the day will be filtered through. And that orientation is not fixed. It is not determined by temperament or history or the particular difficulty of the current season of life. It is available to be chosen every morning in the window that exists between waking and the automatic sequence taking over. That window is narrow, but it is real, and what is placed inside it, or what is allowed to fill it by default, is consequential in ways that extend far beyond the morning itself. So the reflection question is this: when the eyes open tomorrow, what will be given the first access to the morning mind? A reflex inherited from yesterday, an anxiety projected onto a day that has not yet produced anything to be anxious about, a comparison that arrives before any internal orientation has been established, or a pause, however brief, a single honest question about how the day will be met rather than what the day will do, a small and deliberate act of choosing the starting position before the day assigns one. Sometimes what changes a life is not a large decision made in a significant moment. Sometimes it is the first thought chosen on an ordinary morning, before the day has begun, before anything has been asked, before the automatic sequence has had the chance to run. Stay calm, stay wise, and keep living your truth.